Captain Ibrahim Traoré is seen as a beacon of hope, as someone that is looked up to, and people across Africa, not just Burkina Faso, appreciate what he is doing for his country as well as uniting African countries.
Who is the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré? In a time when Africa is seeking more than just reforms, when it needs transformation, the people of Burkina Faso believe they've found a leader who isn't just talking about change, but living it. His name is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and in the eyes of many Burkinabe citizens, he's not just a head of state, he's a symbol of hope. At just 35 years old, Traoré is Africa's youngest leader. But it's not his age that has captured the attention of the continent, it's his boldness, his direction, and his unapologetic embrace of self-reliance. Many now call him the reincarnation of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader from the 1980s who was assassinated after trying to take similar steps to lift the country from poverty and neo-colonial influence. Across the streets of Ouagadougou, Traoré's image is everywhere. Not because he demanded it, but because the people put them there. Posters hang in markets, murals line the roads, and his name is chanted by crowds in the city centre. When asked why, people say things you rarely hear about politicians. He speaks without a script, from the heart, one young man told a visiting filmmaker. He thinks like us, he acts like us, but more importantly, he dreams bigger than any leader we've had. In the heart of Burkina Faso's capital, one woman, standing beside her teenage son, says she sleeps peacefully now. Since the day I was born, I've never seen an African leader loved like this, not just here, but around the world. And she's not exaggerating. From the diaspora in Europe and North America to Pan-Africanists in neighbouring nations, Traoré's leadership is stirring something deep, a belief that Africa can not only stand on its own, but thrive without relying on foreign loans, handouts, or interference. So what's different about this leader? To begin with, Traoré came to power through a military coup in 2022, a move often frowned upon in global politics. But in a country battered by terrorism, poor infrastructure, and a growing youth population without opportunities, many welcomed the takeover as a chance for a fresh start. Rather than extending power for personal gain, Traoré has been pouring it into national development. One of the most striking examples is Burkina Faso's leap into electric vehicle, EV manufacturing. That's right, a country that for decades was ignored in discussions about African industrialization is now building and assembling its own electric cars. In Ouagadougou, the capital, Traoré's administration oversaw the creation of a locally owned and funded EV factory, producing models named after regions in Burkina Faso, like the Saha model, a tribute to the Sahel area. Even more impressive, this factory wasn't financed by China, the World Bank, or any Western backers. It was built entirely by contributions from Burkinabe citizens, both local and in the diaspora. The smallest investment allowed was 10,000 CFA francs, around $16. The message is clear. This factory doesn't belong to the president, it belongs to the people. And it doesn't stop there. The country's agricultural backbone is also getting a revival. In Bobo Dioulasso, the nation's second largest city, a tomato processing factory has reopened under Traoré's vision. Not only is it fully operational, it's run almost entirely by local youth. From those with university degrees to others with no formal schooling, the unifying criteria for employment is passion and commitment to building Burkina Faso from the ground up. "We're not trying to import progress," said one of the factory's managers. "We're building it with our own hands." The tomato paste they produce, branded Adia, is now found on supermarket shelves across the country. Soon, more factories like this one will follow. A second is already running. A third is planned to open later this year in Tenkodogo. Everywhere you look in the country, there are signs of construction. Roads being paved by Burkinabe workers, young men learning to operate heavy machinery, villages receiving infrastructure upgrades they've waited on for decades. According to local officials, Burkina Faso had only 3,000 kilometers of paved roads since independence, but under Traore, the government aims to build 5,000 kilometers every year. And the workers building these roads, not foreign contractors, not outsourced labor, they're Burkinabe youth trained and employed through a new national program. The machines used for construction were bought outright by the government, eliminating dependency on private companies or external debt. It's this focus on dignity, on doing things for themselves, that has made Traore a figure of admiration. But it's not just economics. His government has taken cultural steps to decolonize the national identity. Streets once named after French colonizers are now renamed in honor of African heroes like Thomas Sankara. School uniforms must now be made from locally produced fabric. The judiciary has switched to wearing gowns stitched in Burkina Faso with traditional materials. Even milk processing factories have started operating, again using local raw materials to make butter, yogurt and cheese for Burkinabe consumers. And this shift is giving people more than just pride. It's changing how they see their role in building their country. Take Patrick Parr, a young Burkinabe entrepreneur who returned home from Turkey to launch a ride-hailing company using only electric cars. Why? He saw opportunity in a country finally supporting local businesses and innovation. We have a leader who listens, Patrick said. He doesn't chase outside interest, he puts the nation first. This isn't just a political movement, it's a cultural one. From the farmers who now sell to local factories instead of watching their crops rot, to youth who once dreamed of fleeing to Europe and now dream of staying to build something at home, something is changing in Burkina Faso. And yet, with all this momentum, one thing remains elusive: access to the man behind the transformation. A filmmaker and storyteller who travelled from Ghana to capture the story of Traore spent over 18 days in the country trying to meet him. Every connection, every favour called in, came up short. Locals even warned him, "If you want to see the president, you must be ready to die." That's not a threat, it's an expression of just how impossible it is to reach him, how deeply protected and respected he is by the people. And maybe that's part of the story too. Traore didn't build his following through social media stunts or flashy campaigns. He built it through action, through walking the talk. It's one thing to inspire people with speeches, it's another to make them pick up tools, roll up their sleeves, and help build a new country from scratch. But that's exactly what's happening in Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traore. This isn't a government project on paper. It's something alive, happening in real time, street by street, factory by factory. In a remote village not far from Bobo Dioulasso, where the roads are still dusty and the sun never lets up, rows of tomato crops stretch into the horizon. A few years ago, this land was overlooked. The tomatoes grown here had nowhere to go. They rotted in piles or were sold for scraps. But now, under Traore's leadership, everything has changed. These tomatoes are now raw material, destined for processing plants built by the people, for the people. One plant in particular, the Adia Tomato Factory, has become a symbol. Located in the southwestern part of the country, it was not financed by international corporations or development banks. It was funded entirely by citizens. Thousands of Burkinabe people pitched in to build it. Locals, people in the diaspora, even young workers who had nothing but their time and belief in the vision. We didn't take loans. No foreign investors, just unity, said one of the plant's engineers. The smallest share, 10,000 CFA, we made it happen ourselves. Inside the factory, young workers, many of them in their 20s, sort, clean and process tomatoes that used to go to waste. Some are trained professionals, others came in with no experience but a willingness to work and learn. They all speak proudly of their role, not just because they have jobs, but because they're part of something that feels historic. One manager explained, "It's not just tomatoes, it's the belief that Africa can stand on its own, and we're showing that every day." This message has resonated far beyond the factory walls. More plants are on the way. A second one in Yako is already operating. A third is scheduled to open in Tenkodogo by year's end. It's all part of a national movement to process what Burkina Faso produces, rather than exporting raw goods and importing finished products. This simple idea, produce what we consume what we produce, is now a guiding principle. And it doesn't stop at agriculture. Burkina Faso is now laying down the groundwork for a manufacturing base powered by the people. In the capital city of Ouagadougou, a new wave of entrepreneurs are investing in transport, farming, logistics, and even tech, because the atmosphere finally allows it. The state isn't blocking innovation, it's welcoming it. One young businessman, Patrick Parr, launched an Uber-style electric vehicle service called Let's Go, just months after returning from studying abroad. Why? Because he believed in the new direction of the country. The president is young. He understands us, Patrick said. He listens, he acts, and he encourages us to stay and build. It's not just industry or innovation getting attention, it's infrastructure too. Since gaining independence in 1960, Burkina Faso had only managed to pave around 3,000 kilometers of road. Decades of stagnation left much of the country disconnected. But now, for the first time, there's a plan and action to change that. Traore's administration is aiming to build 5,000 kilometers of paved roads every year. That number sounds ambitious, but when you see the scale of construction happening across the country, you begin to believe it's possible. Bulldozers, graders, mixers, equipment once rented or imported is now owned by the state. The government bought the machinery outright, so they wouldn't need to outsource work or delay projects due to costs. But more importantly, the work is being done by Burkinabe people. Young men from local villages are being trained to operate the machines. Around 400 youth have already been hired and trained in road construction. They're learning valuable skills while contributing to a project that will change the landscape of their country, literally and figuratively. One official put it simply, "We used to think outsiders had to build Africa, but that's a lie. We are building ourselves now." These words aren't just political slogans. They reflect what's happening every day across the nation. The transformation is visible on the roads, in the factories, and in the eyes of the youth who finally see a future worth staying for. Even the justice system isn't exempt. In a symbolic move, Traore's government passed a decree requiring judges and lawyers to wear gowns made from local fabric. It's a small change on the surface, but it carries weight. It reinforces the idea that Burkina Faso doesn't need to imitate former colonial systems to function. It can build something of its own, unique, proud, and rooted in its identity. Schools have also been given a cultural makeover. Students now wear uniforms stitched from Burkinabe fabric. It's more than just support for local industries. It's about shaping national pride from childhood. Teaching kids that local doesn't mean lesser, it means ours. Even in the way he's reshaping the physical spaces of the country, Traoré is sending messages. In the capital, a boulevard once named after French colonizer Charles de Gaulle has now been renamed after Captain Thomas Sankara. The change isn't just symbolic, it's intentional. It reclaims history. It tells Burkinabe people, this is your land and these are your heroes. Not everyone may agree with every move he makes, but it's difficult to deny that something powerful is underway. The citizens see it too, and they're not waiting around for government handouts, they're jumping in. One woman working in a milk processing factory said, "This isn't just the president's vision. It's ours now. She was standing in a factory that turns raw milk into cheese, butter, yogurt, and fresh milk, products once imported from abroad. Now they're made in Burkina Faso by Burkinabe workers. For Burkinabe families, and like many of the country's newest developments, it's 100% locally funded. 5 such milk factories are planned. One is already operational in Ouagadougou. As the days pass, it becomes clearer. This isn't a marketing campaign, it's not a facade. This is national revival in motion. And yet, while all this is happening, Traore himself remains elusive. A visiting documentary creator from Ghana spent more than 2 weeks in the country just trying to meet him. Despite connections, interviews and public support, he still couldn't get through. Everyone he met had praise for the president, but no one had access. Some even joked, you'd have to die to meet him. But beneath the humour is a truth. Traore isn't interested in media appearances, he's focused on work. He didn't build this following through talking, he built it by doing. By the time you hear the phrase, you must be ready to die to meet him, it's clear that President Ibrahim Traore isn't your average head of state. He isn't chasing cameras. He isn't making tours for applause. He's building something quietly, but unmistakably, with the trust of a nation that believes he represents their last, best shot at real transformation. And that belief isn't just emotional, it's earned. In city after city, rural town after rural town, the changes are physical, tangible. A country once known primarily for instability is quickly becoming a symbol of what's possible when leadership meets vision and when people rally behind it. Factories are rising, roads are stretching into forgotten places. Idle land is now active farmland, and the youth, once searching for a way out, are now finding reasons to stay. Take the tomato farms outside Bobo Dioulasso. The journey to get there wasn't easy. 7 hours by road, a car breakdown, and a night in the dark forest with no headlights. But when the documentary team finally arrived, what they found was worth every bump in the road. Fields of tomatoes spread wide under the hot sun. The land wasn't just being farmed, it was being revived. And every crate of tomatoes had a destination, the Ardia factory. A plant owned by the people, run by the people and named by the people, and yet something was missing. For the man telling this story, a filmmaker on a mission to showcase African excellence, the real dream was to meet the person behind it all, Ibrahim Traore. After 18 days of trying, with every lead closing, every door quietly shutting, he began to wonder if it would ever happen. Some told him to give up, so some said, you should be looking for a minister, not the president. But he kept pushing. He made phone calls. He knocked on doors. He reached out to friends in high places, even former Ghana Black Stars captain Asamoah Gyan. And just when he was ready to leave, a message came in. The foreign minister's office in Ouagadougou was willing to meet. He walked in trembling, not from fear, but from hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the man he'd been chasing across the country would finally appear. He was told to wait, and wait, and wait, but it never happened. On his final day, dressed in his best outfit, camera charged and heart full, the meeting still didn't come. Some might see that as failure. If you watch the footage, you'll notice something else. He doesn't sound defeated. He sounds inspired. Because in those 18 days, he didn't just find a leader. He found a country waking up. He found a nation unifying under a clear identity, one that doesn't bow to foreign pressure or mimic Western systems. Instead, it builds its own roads, its own food industry, its own values, its own pride. Everywhere he turned, someone said the same thing in different ways. We are doing this for us now. Burkina Faso's transformation isn't built on loans or borrowed ideas, it's built on sweat, courage, and community ownership. Milk is now processed in factories owned by the people. School uniforms are stitched from local fabric. Laws are enforced by judges wearing gowns made in Burkina Faso. Even the names of streets have changed, erasing colonizers and honoring heroes. And it's just the beginning. Traore's government is planning 5 milk processing plants. 2 are already functional. Another tomato factory is set to open by year's end. The National Road Project is underway, with 5,000 kilometres being added annually, led by trained local youth. And that's not just policy, that's national revival. But it's not perfect, it's hard. Resources are tight, foreign pressures remain, and the road ahead will test the patience and resilience of every citizen. Yet for now, the people remain united behind a leader who gives them something far more valuable than policy: belief. And that belief is spreading. One YouTuber, a prominent Francophone creator, summed it up during her second visit to Burkina Faso. The mindset of young people has changed. They now believe in their country. Before, we wanted to leave. Now, we want to build. And what about the visible markers of decolonisation? One of the most telling examples is what Traoré did with a major boulevard in the capital. For decades, it carried the name of Charles de Gaulle, a French colonizer. Today, it bears the name of Captain Thomas Sankara. A small act, maybe, but it represents something far larger. The reclamation of identity, of history, of dignity. Even in fashion, change is showing. Judges wear local gowns. Students dress in national textiles. Courtrooms and classrooms alike now carry the message: this is our land, and we will define ourselves. The results are visible, but the work is far from done. Even now, the country faces challenges: economic, political, logistical. The reforms are bold, and the resistance from outside forces is real. But Burkina Faso stands firm. And as Traoré himself has said, Africa doesn't need saviours, it needs self-belief. This belief has now sparked a blueprint others are watching closely. Can a small West African country with a history of coups and instability become the heartbeat of a new African industrial era? The answer increasingly is yes. Not because outsiders are betting on it, but because its people already have. The story of Burkina Faso today is not just the story of one president. It's the story of a people reclaiming their voice, their land, and their future. And though our filmmaker never got his final meeting, his story was never really about access to power. It was about witnessing a shift in mindset, a shift in direction, a shift in what Africans believe is possible. He ends his video with a simple line: "I'll be back." And that's the beauty of it, because when you build something real, something rooted, people always come back. What do you think about this revolution happening in Burkina Faso? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this inspired you in any way, like this video to support the work we're doing. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Africa is rising, and this is just the beginning.